August 4th, 1945. World War II is ending. Europe lies in ruins. In days, atomic fire will consume Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But today, inside Spaso House in Moscow, something quieter is happening. Something that will echo through the next 7 years of American diplomacy. A group of Soviet children walks through the doors. They're from the Vladimir Lenin All-Union Pioneer Organization. Think of them as the communist version of Boy Scouts. And they're carrying a gift. It's a wooden carving, the Great Seal of the United States, hand-carved with remarkable detail. Every feather on the eagle, every arrow in its talons, every star in the constellation above, the children present it to Ambassador Avril Harriman with smiles and practiced ceremony. A gesture of friendship between wartime allies, they say. Harriman is moved. He thanks them warmly. And then he does exactly what the Soviets hoped he would do. He hangs it on the wall of his study, right behind his desk, where he conducts the most sensitive business of American diplomacy in Moscow. The trap is set. For the next 7 years, that wooden seal will hang there. Through Harriman's tenure, through his successor's tenure, through the next ambassador after that. And every single conversation held in that room, every classified briefing, every strategic discussion will be transmitted directly to Soviet intelligence officers listening nearby. The Americans have just accepted the most sophisticated listening device ever created. They won't discover it until 1952. And when they finally do, they won't even understand how it works. This is the story of the thing. But to understand the device, you first need to understand its creator. Because this wasn't built by some anonymous Soviet engineer. It was designed by one of the most brilliant and eccentric inventors of the 20th century. His name was Lev Sergeyevich Theremin. The West knew him as Leon Theremin. If you've ever heard that eerie, otherworldly sound in old science fiction movies, you know Theremin's most famous work. The theremin, the electronic instrument you play without touching, became his claim to fame in the 1920s. You might recognize it from the Beach Boys' Good Vibrations, that haunting, wavering sound that feels like it's coming from another dimension. But Theremin was far more than a musical inventor. Born in 1896 in St. Petersburg, he studied physics, astronomy, and engineering. He helped develop early television technology. He created motion detection systems. His understanding of electromagnetic principles was decades ahead of his time. Then something strange happened in 1938. Theremin, who had been living and working in the United States, suddenly returned to the Soviet Union. Some people thought he was homesick. Others whispered about kidnapping by Soviet agents. The truth was darker. Upon his return, he was arrested and sent to a Siberian labor camp. But after several months in the Gulag, Theremin was transferred to what the Soviets called a sharashka, a secret laboratory where imprisoned scientists worked on military projects. The regime's twisted logic at work, imprisoned the brilliant minds, then forced them to create weapons. It was here, under the direction of Soviet intelligence, that Theremin would create something that might be even more ingenious than his musical instrument, a listening device that would rewrite the rules of espionage. The problem Soviet intelligence faced was simple but fundamental. Every listening device they'd ever used had the same weaknesses. Batteries that eventually died. Electronic components that could be detected by American security sweeps. Wires that could be discovered during inspections. Every conventional bug left a trail of evidence. Theremin's solution was revolutionary in its simplicity. He would design a completely passive device, no batteries, no wires, no active electronic components whatsoever. The device would sit dormant and completely undetectable until Soviet agents chose to activate it from outside. The thing itself was remarkably small, a tiny capacitive membrane connected to a 9-inch monopole antenna. The membrane, less than 75 micrometers thick, thinner than a human hair, was mounted inside a silver-plated copper cavity, roughly 20 millimeters in diameter. The entire assembly was hidden inside the carved wooden seal, with small holes drilled beneath the eagle's beak to allow sound waves to reach the membrane. The genius was in how it worked. The device operated on a principle now known as passive cavity resonance. Soviet agents, stationed in a van or building near the embassy, would transmit a powerful radio signal at exactly the right frequency, approximately 330 megahertz. intelligence agencies call this illuminating a passive device. When those radio waves struck the device hidden in the seal, they caused the membrane to vibrate. But here's the brilliant part. That same membrane was also vibrating from something else. Sound waves, conversations happening in the ambassador's study. These sound vibrations altered the capacitance of the cavity, which changed the radio waves bouncing back to the Soviet receiver. The result? The reflected signal carried the audio from the room. Soviet technicians could hear everything said in front of that wooden seal as clearly as if they'd placed a microphone directly on the ambassador's desk. And the Americans had no idea. 7 years. That's how long the thing hung on that wall, recording everything. American security teams swept the room again and again. They found nothing. How could they? The device had no power source to emit signals, no active components to detect. When the Soviets weren't illuminating it with their radio transmitter, it was just a piece of carved wood. The first hint of trouble came in 1951. A British radio operator at the British Embassy in Moscow was monitoring Soviet Air Force radio traffic. Routine work. Then suddenly he heard something impossible. The voice of the British air attaché speaking in another room of his own embassy. The Soviets were apparently beaming radio waves at the British embassy too, and the interference was creating an accidental broadcast. The incident repeated in 1952 at the American embassy. An American interceptor picked up a conversation originating from Spaso House. The State Department immediately dispatched 2 security technicians to investigate, Joseph Bezian and John Ford. Bezian had earned the nickname the Rug Merchant from his colleagues. He suspected the Soviets had been removing and replacing their listening devices each time security sweeps were conducted, so he came up with a plan. He posed as a house guest of the new ambassador, George Kennan, spending several days playing cards and observing the house staff, while secretly hunting for bugs at night. When conventional sweeps found nothing, Bezian and Ford devised something more creative. They would set a trap. Ambassador Kennan would sit in his study and pretend to dictate a classified diplomatic dispatch. The technicians would listen for any suspicious signals. If the Soviets were monitoring, they would need to activate their device to hear it. One evening, Kennan sat at his desk. He began reading from an old declassified document, pretending it was something sensitive and new. Bezian sat nearby, monitoring his receiver equipment. Then he heard it. Kennan's voice, coming through on an unexpected frequency. Bezian rushed into the study. Keep on, he urged the ambassador. Following the signal, Bezian zeroed in on the source. The wall behind the Great Seal. He removed the wooden carving from the wall. Then, to Kennan's shock, he picked up a mason's hammer and began smashing into the brick wall. When the signal suddenly cut out, Bezian realized his mistake. The bug wasn't in the wall. It was inside the seal itself. Kennan later wrote, "In a few moments, it was over." Quivering with excitement, the technician extracted from the shattered depths of the seal a small device, not much larger than a pencil. The device was immediately rushed back to the United States for analysis. The FBI examined it, the CIA examined it, the Naval Research Laboratory examined it, British MI5 examined it, the Marconi Company examined it. None of them could figure out how it worked. The simplicity of the device created confusion. There were no batteries to power it, no active electronics to amplify the signal, no conventional microphone components. The analysts couldn't comprehend how a few pieces of metal could possibly transmit audio across a distance. Eventually, British scientist Peter Wright succeeded in getting the device to work reliably at 800 megahertz. His examination led to the development of a British system codenamed Satyr, which British, American, Canadian, and Australian intelligence agencies used throughout the 1950s. Ambassador Kennan understood the significance immediately. He wrote, "It represented, for that day, a fantastically advanced bit of applied electronics. The Americans had been completely outclassed. Their most sensitive diplomatic conversations had been compromised for nearly a decade, but the discovery of the thing was kept secret. For 8 more years, the American government said nothing publicly about it. Then came May 1960. The Soviets shot down an American U-2 spy plane over their territory. Pilot Francis Gary Powers was captured alive. The Soviets brought him to Moscow and used the incident to embarrass the United States at the United Nations Security Council. They painted America as the aggressor. the violator of Soviet sovereignty. American Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. decided it was time to respond. On the fourth day of the Security Council meetings, Lodge stood up. He produced the Great Seal with its hidden listening device still inside. He held it up for the assembled diplomats and the world's press to see. He explained how the Soviets had hidden the bug inside a gift from children, how they'd used it to spy on American ambassadors for 7 years, how American security teams had swept that room repeatedly and found nothing because the technology was so advanced. Then Lodge made another announcement. The United States had discovered more than 100 concealed listening devices in American embassies and residences across Soviet bloc nations. The espionage, he argued, was mutual. The U-2 incident wasn't the one-sided violation the Soviets were claiming. Both sides were playing the same game. The Soviet resolution condemning the United States was defeated 7 votes to 2. The thing fundamentally changed how intelligence agencies thought about surveillance technology. It proved that a device with no power source, no active components, and no conventional electronics could still transmit audio across significant distances. It was in many ways the ancestor of modern RFID technology that we use today in everything from credit cards to inventory tracking. Today you can see replicas of the Great Seal bug on display at the National Cryptologic Museum and the International Spy Museum. The original device was analyzed so extensively that little may remain of it. Taken apart piece by piece as American and British scientists tried to understand how they'd been so thoroughly beaten at their own game. In the world of espionage, gifts are never free. Trust is always a vulnerability. And sometimes the most dangerous weapons don't look like weapons at all. Sometimes they look exactly like tokens of friendship.